My fiancé's betrayal. She left me for a better dude her family chose. My family says I need better. Years on, she's losing it seeing my success and soulmate. How do you come back from hearing the woman you love, the one with your ring on her finger, agree with her parents that you're simply not good enough to marry? That's what shattered my world, in a single, gut-wrenching moment. For years of my life, a ring on her finger, and suddenly, it all evaporated because my dreams didn't come with a silver spoon. My name is Leo. I was 29 back then, holed up in a tiny, overpriced apartment, pouring 16-hour days into building AI automation tools, convinced I was on the brink of something big. Chloe, she was 26 when we met, sharp and energetic in marketing. She always said she loved my passion, how I could make complex algorithms sound like poetry. My heart swore she got it. Her parents, though? Mr. and Mrs. Albright. From day one, they were a different story entirely. Old money. The kind of family where your last name is a golden key, and reputation trumps anything as messy as ideas or potential. They never called me trash to my face, far too refined for that. But every single interaction was a test I was perpetually failing. The first time I met them, Mr. Albright asked what I did. When I mentioned AI automation, he gave me this tight, dismissive smile and asked if I meant like chatbots. Like I was building some trivial toy, not a real business. Mrs. Albright was, in her own way, worse. She was always circling back to stability and planning for the future. Constant questions directed at Chloe: where will you live? How will you afford children? What kind of schools will they go to? Every question was a subtle knife twist, a quiet drumbeat of he can't provide. It made my teeth ache. Chloe would always defend me afterward, telling me her parents were just old-fashioned, that they'd come around once I got funding. That love was what mattered. I was stupid enough to believe her, truly. I proposed after 3 years. I scrimped and saved for 6 months to buy a ring that wasn't flashy, but it wasn't cheap either. And she said yes, crying happy tears in the very same apartment where I often coded until 3 in the morning. For a while, everything felt normal. We planned a small wedding, talked about getting a place together. But her parents' comments? They grew more frequent, more pointed. When Chloe mentioned we were waiting until my software launched, Mrs. Albright would go quiet. A loaded silence that screamed volumes. Mr. Albright started dropping names of guys from their social circle, successful guys with corporate titles. He'd mention their law firm partnerships or investment banking positions casually, and Chloe would just nod politely while I sat there, feeling like a prop in my own life. The breaking point wasn't some dramatic blowout. It was just me, in the wrong place at the wrong time. 6 months after we got engaged, Chloe had invited me to her parents' house for dinner. Nothing unusual. I got there early, let myself in through the side door like I'd done 100 times. I heard voices from the study, her parents, and Chloe. I was about to announce myself when my name hit my ears. Mr. Albright was speaking, his voice calm, measured, like he was closing a deal. He was telling Chloe that I was nice and probably talented, but potential doesn't pay mortgages. I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. Then Mrs. Albright chimed in, saying they didn't raise her to struggle, that Chloe deserved someone established, someone who could give her the life she was used to. I waited. My breath hitched, waiting for Chloe to leap to my defense, to tell them they were being unfair. Instead, I heard her whisper, "I know, Mom. I know. I just thought he'd have real traction by now." And something inside my chest just cracked. Mr. Albright continued, talking about how love doesn't pay for weddings or houses or private schools, how she shouldn't settle. Mrs. Albright then brought up Nathan Miller, specifically mentioning how Chloe and he always got along, how he'd made junior partner at a major corporate law firm at only 30. That name, Nathan Miller, stuck in my head like a splinter. I backed out quietly, my movements almost silent. I texted Chloe that something came up with the code, then drove home in complete silence. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't say a word. I just sat at my desk, staring at lines of code, and realized I'd been auditioning for a role I was never going to get. 2 weeks later, Chloe's mom called and invited us to a small family dinner. Her voice was sugary, in a way that made my skin crawl. I almost said no, but Chloe looked so hopeful, like maybe this was them finally accepting us. So, I put on a button-down shirt and showed up. Nathan Miller was there. Sitting in the living room, like he belonged. Perfectly styled hair, a watch that probably cost more than my entire coding setup. Chloe's mom introduced him as an old family friend, said they practically grew up together. He shook my hand with this firm grip that lasted just a second too long. Dinner was excruciating. Mr. Albright peppered Nathan with questions about his cases, his clients, his firm's latest merger. Nathan answered with this easy confidence that made me feel like a kid at the adults' table. Every time I tried to contribute, the conversation would pivot away. Chloe just sat there, smiling politely, not noticing, or maybe not caring, that her parents were conducting a live comparison. At one point, Mr. Albright turned to me and asked about my launch timeline. Before I could even open my mouth, Mrs. Albright cut in, talking about how Nathan just closed a 6-figure deal. Nathan had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, but not enough to actually deflect. I excused myself early, mumbled something about debugging. Chloe walked me to the door. I asked her point blank if she knew Nathan would be there. She hesitated. Just long enough for me to know the answer was yes. She touched my arm, told me it was just dinner, not to read into it. But I was already reading into it. I was reading the whole damn book. The breakup happened 3 days later, in her apartment, late at night. I'd spent 72 hours barely sleeping. She started with "We need to talk," and I knew. I already knew. But I let her say it anyway. I love you, Leo. I really do. But I need stability. I need to know we're going to be okay. And I can't keep waiting for someday. Her voice cracked on that last word, like she was the one being hurt. I asked if this was about Nathan. She looked away. That was answer enough. She started to say something about what her parents thought, and I cut her off. I asked if it was her parents thinking, or her thinking. She went quiet. Then she slid the ring off her finger, that ring I'd worked overtime for, and placed it on the coffee table between us, like evidence in a trial. She told me she needed more than dreams, needed someone who was already there. I stood up. I couldn't sit there anymore. You didn't choose a better man, Chloe, I said, not yelling, just stating a fact. You chose safety. And I walked out. 2 days later, my buddy Caleb sent me a screenshot, Chloe and Nathan on Instagram, his arm around her shoulders, the caption reading about finding her forever with a heart emoji. I stared at that photo for a long time before I deleted all my social media. The universe has a sick sense of humor. I learned that the hard way when my startup crashed 3 months after Chloe left. And I ended up delivering food to her and her perfect new boyfriend. People talk about rock bottom like it's one specific moment, one bad day. It's not. It's a slow, agonizing slide. Every week, something else breaks, and you just keep falling. After the breakup, I threw myself into work, spent 18-hour days coding, pitching, telling myself I'd show them all. I'd build something so successful they'd choke on their judgments. I got close, too. 2 potential investors, meetings scheduled, term sheets drafted. Then the first one backed out at the last minute, mumbling about a crowded market. The second one ghosted me completely after 3 months of stringing me along. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd burned through my savings keeping the servers running and paying for tools I couldn't afford. The landlord wanted rent I didn't have. My credit cards were maxed. I had to shut everything down. I tried to pivot, tried to salvage some code, but without funding, there was no path forward. Caleb told me I could crash at his place until I figured things out. I moved in with 2 duffel bags and a laptop. Everything I owned fit in the bed of my truck. I needed money, any money, fast. So, I signed up for food delivery apps, the kind where you drive around for 12 hours and maybe make $100 if you're lucky. It was humiliating in ways I can't fully describe. Going from building AI systems to hauling burgers and Chinese takeout? But pride doesn't pay bills, and I was drowning. I worked nights mostly, drove through the same neighborhoods where Chloe and I used to go on dates. Every street corner felt like a ghost. Caleb never made me feel bad about it, never asked when I'd get back on my feet. He just split his groceries with me and pretended not to notice when I couldn't chip in for rent. 3 months into this new life, I was numb, running on autopilot, accepting orders and dropping them off without really seeing anything. Then one night, I got an order for an upscale Italian place downtown. The kind of restaurant Chloe always wanted to go to, but I could never afford. I should have known right then that the universe was setting me up. I picked up the order, 2 entrees and a bottle of wine, and drove to this fancy apartment building with a doorman and everything. Took the elevator up to the 8th floor. I knocked on the door of apartment 814. Nathan opened it. He recognized me instantly. I saw it in his eyes, that flash of surprise, followed by something worse. Pity, mixed with amusement. He didn't say anything at first, just took the bag from my hands. Then Chloe appeared behind him, asking who it was. She saw me standing there in my delivery jacket with the logo on it, holding their receipt, and her face went completely white. For a second, nobody moved. We just stood there in this horrible, frozen moment. And I could see behind them into the apartment, exposed brick, modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind of place I'd promised Chloe we'd have someday. Nathan broke the silence, told me to have a good night in this tone that wasn't quite mocking, but wasn't quite kind either. Like he was talking to the help. He handed me a $20 bill as a tip. Chloe still hadn't said anything. She just stood there, her hand over her mouth. And I realized she wasn't going to. She wasn't going to acknowledge me, or defend me, or do anything except watch. I took the 20, said, "Thank you, because that's what you do." Then I walked back to the elevator, feeling like I'd been gutted. The worst part wasn't that they saw me like that, delivering their fancy dinner in my beat-up jacket. It was that Chloe stayed silent again. Just like she had with her parents. Just like she had at that family dinner. And I finally understood. This was who she was. I drove back to Caleb's place and sat in the truck for an hour, not crying, not angry. Just empty. Caleb found me there eventually, asked what happened. I told him everything. He offered to go egg their apartment, which would have been funny if I wasn't so tired. Instead, I went inside, opened my laptop for the first time in weeks, and started deleting things. Every digital trace of the life I tried to build. Caleb asked what I was doing. I told him, I don't want revenge. I want out. And I meant it. I was done trying to prove anything to anyone. Done chasing some fantasy of showing up Chloe and her family. Done letting them live rent-free in my head. That night was a turning point. Not because anything got better immediately, but because I stopped performing for an invisible audience. The AI startup thing was dead. I'd burned every bridge with investors, and I didn't have the credibility to start over in that space. So, I needed something completely different. I started small, really small, taking contract work. Basic website maintenance, IT support for local businesses. It wasn't glamorous. I spent a lot of time resetting passwords and troubleshooting printer issues. But it was steady. And it was mine. I advertised on local community boards, charged reasonable rates, and showed up on time, which apparently put me ahead of half the competition. After 6 months of that, I'd saved enough to move into my own place. Nothing fancy, a studio apartment above a dry cleaner, but it had 4 walls and a door that locked. And I didn't have to apologize to anyone for existing. Caleb threw me a housewarming party, just him and 2 other friends, with pizza and cheap beer. It felt more real than any of the fancy dinners at the Albright house ever had. But something was gnawing at me during those contract jobs. I kept seeing the same problem over and over: small businesses drowning in manual processes, spending hours on tasks that could be automated, but couldn't afford enterprise solutions. That's when it clicked. The AI tools I'd built before were aimed too high, trying to compete with the big players. But there was a massive, underserved market right in front of me. I started coding again, but it was different this time. I was building lightweight automation tools specifically for small and mid-sized companies. Things that could integrate with their existing systems without requiring a complete overhaul. I kept my contract work during the day to pay the bills, coded at night, and within 6 months, I had a working product. I called it Streamline AI, focused on document processing and workflow automation, and priced it at a point where small businesses could actually afford it. The first client was a local accounting firm that was manually entering data from hundreds of invoices every month. My tool cut their processing time by 70%. That led to referrals, which led to more clients. Within a year, I had enough recurring revenue to quit the contract work. I brought on a partner, a guy named Ray, who'd been doing business development for decades. We started targeting mid-sized companies, the kind that were too small for the enterprise giants, but too big for manual processes. The irony wasn't lost on me that a lot of our clients were in professional services, law firms, consulting agencies, the exact world that had rejected me. 2 years after that night at apartment 814, Streamline AI was processing millions of documents monthly. We had 20 employees. I'd moved into an actual house with an office where I could work without sitting on my bed. Success is weird when it finally shows up, because it doesn't feel like the movies. There's no dramatic moment where everything clicks. It's just a series of small wins that eventually add up to something you didn't expect. For years after the breakup, Streamline AI became one of the fastest-growing automation platforms in the region. We'd been featured in 2 major tech publications, and those venture capital firms that had ghosted me years earlier were suddenly returning my calls. I bought a small house, nothing extravagant, but it was mine, with an actual home office and space to think. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about money. I met someone, too. Her name was Maria. She worked as a physical therapist and had zero interest in status or impressing anyone. She'd reached out because her clinic needed help streamlining their patient intake process, and we just clicked. She knew about Chloe. I told her the whole story on our 3rd date, because I figured she deserved to know what she was getting into. She just shrugged and said, "People who choose based on their parents' opinions usually end up miserable." Anyway, we'd been together for 8 months when the universe decided to remind me that karma doesn't forget anyone. I was at a tech conference downtown, the kind of industry event where founders and investors network and pitch their companies. Ray had convinced me to take a booth to showcase our latest features. We were getting decent attention. Several companies wanted demos, and I was talking to a potential client when I saw them across the exhibition hall. Chloe and Nathan. Dressed like they were at a fundraiser gala instead of a tech conference. They looked so out of place, it was almost funny. Nathan saw me first, did this weird double take like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then he said something to Chloe and pointed in my direction. I watched her face change as she recognized me. Watched her scan the crowd, and our booth, and the banner with Streamline AI's logo and our impressive client list. I could see her doing the math in her head. They didn't come over right away, just kind of hovered at a distance. I went back to my conversation like they weren't there, because honestly, they weren't important anymore. The potential client turned into an actual client, signed a contract for a full implementation. By the time I finished the paperwork, Chloe was standing at the edge of our booth. She looked different. Still beautiful, but tired in a way I couldn't quite place, like someone who'd been smiling for too long. She asked if she could talk to me, and I almost said no. But Maria had taught me that closure sometimes means letting people say what they need to say. So, I told Ray I'd be back in 5 minutes and walked with Chloe to a quieter corner of the hall. She started with small talk, asked how I'd been, said the company looked incredible. I just waited. Because I knew she hadn't pulled me aside to discuss automation workflows. Finally, she got to it. She told me she'd made a mistake, that she'd listened to her parents instead of her heart, that she'd chosen security over happiness, and had been paying for it ever since. I asked what she meant. She admitted that Nathan wasn't who she thought he was. That the pressure of maintaining his image had made him controlling and distant. That her parents still weren't satisfied, because nothing was ever enough for them. Then she mentioned something that made the pieces click. Nathan's firm had been struggling. They'd lost several major clients to more efficient competitors, and he'd been passed over for senior partner twice now. She looked at me with these desperate eyes and said, I should have believed in us, Leo. I should have waited. And I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a kind of distant sadness for the person she could have been. I told her that was her choice to make, that she'd chosen the path she thought was safe, and now she had to live with it. She started to say something about second chances, about how we'd been good together once. I stopped her there, told her gently but firmly that I was with someone now, someone who'd never asked me to be anything other than myself, and that I was happy in a way I'd never been with her. You didn't just choose Nathan, Chloe. You chose your parents' approval over building something real. And that's something I can't fix for you. Her face crumpled a little. She asked if I hated her. I told her, honestly, that I didn't. That I'd stopped thinking about her years ago. And somehow, that seemed to hurt her more than anger would have. We stood there for another minute in awkward silence. Then she thanked me for talking to her and walked back to where Nathan was waiting, looking annoyed and checking his phone. The real irony came 2 weeks later. Nathan's firm reached out to Ray about a potential partnership. They wanted to integrate Streamline AI into their document management system. Said they were losing clients because their processes were too slow and outdated. Ray brought me the inquiry with this knowing look, and I had to laugh at the cosmic joke of it all. Nathan Miller's law firm, the same firm that represented everything the Albrights valued, was now coming to me for help, because they couldn't keep up with the market. I thought about it for exactly 5 seconds before I told Ray to decline politely. I said we were focused on clients who'd supported us from the beginning, not ones who only showed up when they were desperate. Ray didn't argue. He just sent a professional response, referring them to our competitors. A few days later, Mr. Albright called the office directly. Ray transferred it to me before I could stop him. Chloe's dad used his business voice, the smooth one he probably used with everyone. Talked about how impressive our growth had been, how he'd been following our success, asked if we'd reconsider working with Nathan's firm. I let him finish, let him compliment my business acumen, and then I very politely told him that we had a full client roster and were being selective about new partnerships. He offered premium rates, expedited payments, whatever we needed. And I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice, the raw realization that he was asking for a favor from someone he'd once considered beneath his daughter. Maria asked me later if I felt vindicated, if turning them down felt like justice. I had to think about it. The truth was, it didn't feel like anything dramatic. It just felt like closing a door that should have been closed years ago. I'd spent 2 years thinking about them, another 2 years not thinking about them, and now they were back asking for help. I simply didn't owe them anything. They wanted someone who was already successful, I told Maria. I became successful without them. And that's the whole point. She kissed me and said that was the right answer, and we went back to planning our weekend trip. Something simple and normal, in our own way. Chloe tried reaching out one more time, about a month later. I saw a message request from a new account, but I didn't open it. I just archived it without reading, because whatever she had to say wasn't going to change anything. The Albrights stopped calling. Nathan's firm found some other solution, and my life continued forward without them in it. 6 months after that tech conference, I heard through the industry grapevine that Nathan had left his firm. Something about the partners pushing him out after too many blown opportunities. And apparently the Albrights were not taking it well. But by then, I was already on to the next thing, expanding Streamline AI into new markets, planning a future with Maria, and living a life where their approval had never mattered less. What do you think about Leo's choices? Was he too harsh, or completely justified? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to hear your take.